Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Eliza Chandler, and my pronouns are she and her. And I'm the executive director of the Office of Social Innovation here at TMU. We're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the two Credit First Nations. At TMU, we start our events with land acknowledgements to acknowledge Indigenous presence, assert Indigenous sovereignty, and keep the impacts of colonization at the front of our mind as we do our work. Toronto is in the Ditchwood-Bunspoon territory. The Ditchwood-Bunspoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee people. And it bounds them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations, people, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Today, Toronto is home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island and from other territories, as well as others who have come here by choice, force, and otherwise as a result of colonization and imperialism. Keeping the peace in this context requires us to learn about colonization so we can engage in reconciliation and seek innovative solutions for positive social change. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action affirm that treaties with Indigenous people must be lawfully honored. We are all treaty people, and we all have the responsibility for upholding these agreements. We invite you to read and reflect on the TRC and other Indigenous works, such as the Standing Strong report here at TMU, and consider what you can do in your sphere of influence to advocate for decolonization. As we have these conversations today about access, disability, immigration, precarious status, and decolonization in the institution, we do so in the context of ongoing genocides in Sudan, the Congo, and Gaza. Today marks the 424th day since the beginning of the war in and on Gaza, and the number of Palestinians killed by this genocide far exceeds the 45,000 reported deaths. In this conversation, we reflect on how colonialism and decolonial resistance shapes the topics we take up today. Before we begin, I'd like to say a few words about access. We have ASL interpreters, David, Kalinda, and Catherine, here with us today. We have the interpreters called up on a laptop, so if you'd like to chat with any deaf participants, just flag one of us down and we can help facilitate that. If you're joining by Zoom, feel free to turn on the captions. There's an all-gender single-stall washroom right across the hall with gender-specific washrooms that are accessible on either side of that. This is a relaxed space. Feel free to get up, move around, get some food prepared for us by that Hadrami guy, lentil soup, and pastries, and we can help you get any of those. Feel free to leave the room, come back, and do whatever you need to do to make yourself comfortable. If you need anything at all, please find one of our staff or volunteers. A reminder that this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website in the coming weeks. If you don't want to be recorded, just indicate as such. And the video camera and the camera doing photographs won't capture you. We are using an owl for the Zoom call that tends to follow people around when they speak, so we don't have much control over that. If you don't want to be captured by the owl, you can go into our overflow room, just wait, the room next to us down the hall, 705, and watch the live stream. I just see that. There's a live stream going on in that hallway. So I wanted to take a moment to welcome you all to the Office of Social Innovation. We develop experiential learning, research, and funding opportunities to transform equitable and just access to education. The OSI approach emphasizes relationship building in order to support and participate in a self-determining community built on reciprocity, justice, and decolonization. OSI hopes initiatives such as the Social Innovation Access Fund, a fund which supports students in community organizing and activist efforts, as well as sanctuary scholars and access pathways to post-secondary education for students with precarious immigration status. You'll hear a bit more about both of these initiatives throughout the event. This is our first of 3 transformation cafes that will animate the OSI strategic theme, which is social justice approaches to accessing education and campus space. In a minute, we'll begin with a discussion with our panelists, and then we will present you all with some questions to have some small group discussion at your table, and then we'll gather back for some closing words. So welcome, Bernetta, Leal, and MK. It's wonderful to be with you for this conversation. I'm going to start by introducing you all, and then I have a question to get us started in our conversation. So Bernetta Abril is a former sanctuary scholar and current graduate student at York University, doing a master's of education and a graduate diploma in post-secondary education, community, culture, and policy. Bernetta is also a high school educator and holds an honors bilingual BA in psychology from Glendon College, a Bachelor of Education from York University, and certificates in counseling, community mental health, and crisis intervention and prevention, with a focus on increasing equitable access to education for sanctuary scholars. Bernetta works with the Sanctuary Student Solidarity and Support, or S4 Collective. Her research focuses on exploring these barriers, such as immigration policies, educational limitations, and financial challenges that sanctuary scholars face in accessing post-secondary education, while also examining their campus experience to identify strategies for a more inclusive and supportive environment. Bernetta enjoys reading and writing short stories and poetry, mostly spoken word poetry, and she also enjoys teaching, meeting students from all over the world and learning together and from them. MK Aju Manu is a multidisciplinary and facilitator. His practice delves individual storytelling as an intimate space to explore Afro-diaspora, queer, and trans cultures through myth, memory, and sound. Their primary medium, collage, through their primary medium of collage, MK's practice serves as a critical method for crafting narratives that reflect Black, queer, and trans ways of being, knowing, and feeling. By repurposing mass-produced images, they articulate personal and communal stories that confront and explore the social, spiritual, and systemic conditions of Black life. Influenced by the work of Kwekwe Imazi, Audre Lorde, and Ashton Crawley, and his work examines the Black, queer, and trans body as a living archive. They are interested in engaging with both collective and personal memories to cultivate a practice of entombment and a turning towards oneself. Their involvement in community engaged initiatives include co-founding Between Them Collective, a Black-led queer and trans reading group focused on the literary arts of Black writers. Notably, Between Them Collective received PAC funding in 2021 and 2024. MK clearly works as an artist in cultural management, in queer history and storytelling. And finally, Leah Schumann, she and her, is an assistant professor of design studies in the Creative School and the co-director of the Studio for Media Activism and Critical Thought here at TMU. She holds a PhD in Educational Studies from McGill University, a Master's of Design in Visual Communication Design from the University of Alberta, and a Bachelor of Science in Graphic Design from the Lebanese American University. Her research areas are in the intersections of critical design studies and teaching and learning in higher education. So welcome, everyone. So a few weeks ago, we had a really robust conversation with the speakers and with the rest of the OSI staff about the politics and the complexities of facilitating access and inclusion in the university. In that conversation, we spoke about how disability justice activist Pam Minkus teaches us about how we must address issues of access, but do so in a way that transforms the places and systems that we find ourselves in. So drawing on that conversation, I'm going to begin by asking you, what does access to education mean to you? And I invite you to speak from the perspective of your lived experience, your activism, and your community work. Renata, I'll start with you, and then we can pass it along. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. All right, hey folks, can you hear me? Okay, yeah, this works. Awesome. So, I am Renata, and I am a former sanctuary scholar. So, what exactly does that mean? Basically, what it means is that folks like me, we do not have, or we do not have, the opportunity to access post-secondary education and pay domestic rates. Up until 2017, when that program started at York University, and then TMU started their program last year. So up until then, if you had precarious immigration status, or you were waiting to get status, or you had no status, as long as you don't have PR or citizenship, you could not access post-secondary education. So through the Sanctuary Scholars Program, when it first started, it allowed folks like me to be able to enroll into post-secondary education. And I was among the very first cohort of students who were able to participate in that program at York University, and we had to go through it in its initial stages and go through the kinks and the limitations and try to figure it out as we were going along. And basically, this Sanctuary Scholars Program, in terms of access to education, it allows us an entry point into post-secondary education that we otherwise would not have. Because without this system in place, there are no other systems here in Canada that allows us to do that, right? So in the US, there is the DREAM Act, where you have the dreamers, where they can access school and pay domestic rates. Here, we do not have any such legislation or policy, right? So at the K-12 level, students can go to school. You can enroll in school because, especially in Ontario, there is the Education Act, Section 49.1, that says that you can allow students to enroll regardless of their or their parents' immigration status. However, at the post-secondary level, there is that policy gap. So after grade 12, it kind of drops off and you're left on your own pretty much to figure it out. So basically what access means to me, or access to education means, is that we have systems in place that caters to all marginalized populations, all equity-seeking groups, regardless of where you are, where you come from, your immigration status, your racial background, your religion. It does not matter. So access is creating those spaces within our systems that allow people to get the same level of resources and tools and skills that everybody else has. So when we have a system that is set up in a way that excludes certain people, then it shows us that, you know what, it's not very equitable and access is lacking. And furthermore, I'd like to add that throughout my post-secondary education here in Canada, being in the first cohort of sanctuary scholars, I've learned quite a bit. And when I started initially, I did not mean to go into education. I mean, I always loved learning. It was one of the values that my mom really pushed on us because she was denied the opportunity to go to school. So I grew up with knowing that, you know what, you need to get an education. Education opens doors. Education is the way to upward mobility. So I went into post-secondary hoping to pursue my bachelor's in psychology, but somewhere along the way, it opened up my eyes to the importance of everybody getting that education, because it was denied to me for so long. It was such an elusive dream for so long that when I had it and when I got the opportunity to do it, it made me realize that everybody should have that. And I kind of pivoted towards education, which is where I am now. So I did my bachelor's, I did a B.Ed together with my bachelor's. Not the best idea to do two degrees at the same time. Sounds good in theory, in practice, not great. But I did it, I survived, and I am now working as a teacher, and I work with teenagers, and it's really good, and it's really cool to be in that space, to connect with folks at that age, and to be able to kind of bridge that gap and to allow that kind of support from high school, because with sanctuary scholars, people with precarious immigration status, you do not have the luxury of saying, I do not have regularized immigration status, because there is that fear of repercussions, right? So unless you have regularized status, you won't say, oh, I was in that situation, right? So being in that space, it allows me to make connections with students when they're going through the high school career, to connect with guidance counselors, to build that network so that we can pass on that information, right? Because now we have the S4 collective that I am a part of, and what we do is connect with students to help them become aware of those programs at Europe and at TMU, the Sanctuary Scholars Program, because we are such a vulnerable population, there is that that layer where we have to be very particular about how we spread that message, about how we put that information out there, because we have to take into account people's safety, because that is a very, very, very huge, important, and essential part of the work that we do. And while we're thinking about access, and we would like to put that information out there to reach as many people as we can, and to let them know that, you know what, after high school you have options, even with those programs being in place, because there's no policy, or there's no law, or there's nothing on the books that helps support it. They still exist in this kind of limbo out in the ether, so to speak. So it's not really tethered to anything tangible. Like, we're there, but we're mostly invisible. And it's very important to have conversations like this. And I'm very grateful to all of you who are here today, who are helping to help push this conversation along and to bring awareness to this situation that we're in, to bring awareness to this issue. We're really grateful for that. So basically, access means getting in and having the ability, or having a platform to have such conversations. So I think that is very important when it comes to access, right? Amplifying the voices that otherwise would have been silenced by the system that allows these kind of things to continue on. And I will stop here.
You can pass it to him.
It's okay. Folks, can you hear me well? We share the same type of mom. She called me on my way here saying that I'm not eating well and I'm running late. I'm like, Mama, I'm running late. We talk about me not eating well later on. So, but yeah, my mom was like that. After our conversation, I kept on thinking about access. There's the systemic part that I'm gonna talk about, but also I had a set of questions that I was thinking about in relation to access, education, and power. So I'm gonna throw those hopefully we can think together about them. I'm going to read to contain my ideas because I can be very... So who has the power to grant access to others? To not only education, but everything else that we should have full access to for free. Where do those who grant access to others, to education and other rights, receive the power from to grant the access? How do they relate to those powers? To the powers that could strip away access from others? I also was thinking about what do people, in this case students, who have been granted access, what do they have to give up in return for this access to education? To help us think about this question, I will give an example of the current students' movement around the world, in solidarity with the Palestinian people and against the genocide in Gaza. And as I say this, I think of our students and folks who don't know how much students are doing work at TMU. Please look at SJP's like socials. So I want to shout out to the effort they have been doing day in, day out since the last year, and also following their leadership and their strength. So students in the movement, we can say, have been granted access to education, many of whom belong to non-dominant social groups, including many Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, racialized, among others, and in solidarity with them. Before October 2023, students were probably learning critical thinking, anti-decolonial ways of existing and relating, discussing power, politics, and topics which higher education institutions pride themselves on fostering. And there was no problem to that, right? Like we could intellectualize around like race, racism, decolonization, all good. So we can say that the formula that universities prefer is students get access to education, they learn, the institution is proud of its offerings, hoping to send those students out into the world after graduation to tell others of the access they generously received and the critical lessons they learned within the walls of our institutions. However, it did not go according to the plan or the formula with this generation of students, because they acted upon what they were learning. Education or learning, unlearning, informal, this is very important that we didn't teach them that, they learn all day from different ways. It ignited passion in students' heart for justice and liberation, especially after several movements before this current Palestine solidarity movement. So they're excited about justice and liberation, and hence, very obviously, Palestine. So in principle, this should all be aligned with the values of universities, which in the first place attracted these students to their campuses, with the promise of education for all and education for change. All that EDI marketing campaigns used to make institutions seem like they genuinely care to grant access to historically access-deprived individuals, including students, faculty, and other staff. So these universities continue to punish Palestinian and pro-Palestinian students and faculty for not being obedient, so that is the price. They gave them access to higher education, and how dare they demand more of their universities? And the same argument we can extend to Western governments and other power entities and the conditional access they grant racialized folks, Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and others, especially if they have not historically had access to all human rights. How dare they ask for more humanity? How dare they speak against a genocidal colonial state? How dare they demand for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians to immediately stop? How dare they use what they have learned to criticize those who gave them access? The last set of questions that I've been thinking about is how do we then design education systems or environments or structures or systems that strip away the power of few over granting access or restrictions to others so that no one has to reduce aspects of their humanity in return to that conditional access they were granted, because it's rightfully ours to learn, to live, all of it. So the Palestine exception as a framework teaches all of us about who has the power to grant or restrict access to what is rightfully ours. It teaches us about the price many have to pay in return to the access they receive from those in power, including access to education. Hopefully the student movement for Palestine also teaches us to resist current power structures and to imagine radical alternatives, including alternative higher education models that do not rely, the problem is they rely on power and profits. That is why they dismiss the humanity and the justice that students are fighting and calling for. Because Palestine and the student movement have exposed the failure of our universities to live up to the equity and access claims that they have been making profit of, so how can we do better as educators and students when our institutions are failing? Especially for those of us who believe in education for freedom and liberation. I'm gonna stop here. So that's what I was thinking.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is MK. Thank you, Eliza, for the introduction. My pronouns are they, them. I am a black mask trans person. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and jeans with white stripes on them. So to answer this question, which I really appreciate, it's really hard. It was really hard and is really hard to imagine an accessible education within sort of like a colonial institution, because I actually don't think that accessible education exists within this colonial institution. And so I began to think about my times here at TMU, because I'm a former TMU alumni, and I was here for maybe around like 5 years, pursuing education in social work. And when I think about my time here at TMU, I think about how often my peers and I had to depend on each other for like an access to education. I think about like what social education looked like among my friends and I, where we had to sort of gather and really sort of have conversations that were taking place like in our classrooms, but we're missing a sort of intersectional sort of approach to the conversation. So a lot of the times my friends and I would sort of meet in the racialized student collective or the trans student collective, in spaces around campus that felt accessible enough to sort of have the conversations of like, what is actually missing in our classrooms? Like what is being taught that is like really sort of being perpetuated, especially in, I think like most of my peers were sort of doing things like social work or sociology, and it's like, okay, you know, a lot of the things that we are learning or a lot of the things that we are being told was actually perpetuating a system of sort of oppression in many ways. Like going to classrooms where I once had a professor sort of say the N-word, not sort of, but say the N-word in class. And I remember that I immediately brought it to my peers and my community in sort of the racialized student collective, but it wasn't anything I really ever thought to sort of bring it to folks like administration here at TMU, just because I'm like, I'm going to further go through more sort of like racism. It's going to be like inaccessible to sort of have these conversations about a white professor who is using the N-word in the classroom, right? And so, you know, I also think about like my sort of experience with education as a child till now. I can't think of a time where accessing education has ever been sort of free of racism or free of ableism or sanism, specifically like anti-Black sanism. I can also think about many times where teachers and educators that I had would assume that, okay, because a particular student is, you know, learning in a different way or learning in a way that feels accessible to them, that they are, they must have like an attention deficit disorder. And now because this student is assumed to have, you know, an attention deficit disorder, like they now have to take medication. And like the harm, the actual harm and the violence that, you know, misinformed educators sort of project onto Black, Indigenous, and other racialized students, and how that has continued from when I was a child till my last year in university. So I think about like, you know, education and how we think about it, like our understandings of education within an institution is actually not accessible. It's like I don't think it can be accessible. I don't. And as much as that you know, these conversations take place, I think they're necessary because I think it's important to challenge and disrupt as much as we can. But from the bones and the identity and the DNA of an institution is built from a place of white supremacy, it's like there's limitations. And unfortunately, it's folks who are disabled, folks who are Black, folks who are Indigenous and racialized who have to sort of be the carriers of that sort of violence and of that legacy of colonialism. And so those are my thoughts around that. I think I feel quite strong about the fact that I actually don't think the system and the infrastructure as it has been historically set up for us is like accessible at all. And so, you know, to answer your question, because I don't know if I'm answering your question, but to answer it, I think an accessible education is like intersectional. I also think it's an education that is within the hands of our community actually, right? A lot of the education that I have access have been for free. And I didn't actually have to pay anything for it. I didn't have to pay $7,000. My friends didn't have, my international student friends didn't have to pay like $20,000 to access the education that we have sort of drawn from our sort of our own wisdoms, our collective wisdoms, right? And so that's the education that I think about. I think that's the education that I think is most sustainable. It's the education that I think is most accessible and affordable because it's free. So that's what I have to say. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bernetta and Leo and MK. I think together as a panel, you really represent how access to education, as you're describing, Bernetta, is something that we take for granted here in Canada, on Turtle Island, and for many, as you're describing, it's a fight, and it is something that's not accessible to all folks here on our land, even though we know that the United Nations Human Rights Council recommends education as a pathway for precarious folks with precarious status. I loved your discussion, Lael, about how the very sort of pillars of particularly KMU, social justice, critical engagement, experiential learning, these kinds of things are being mobilized by this generation that's coming through in ways that are perhaps unexpected and offer a challenge to, as you say, MK, the colonial bones of the university, and how people are making education both within and outside of these bones. At the same time, this is where we find ourselves in. And so doing the work of identifying these spaces that create barriers for folks without status, or for folks with precarious status, disabled folks, folks who are engaged in a whole other life and activism and perhaps trauma outside of the university, how to make space for this within, as you're saying, a colonial structure. So we now will move on to the second phase of the event, which is to have small group discussions. And we have some questions for you that came out of our discussions, and we've written them out and we printed them on the table. And I'll read them out loud for you right now. So these are just prompts, take them as prompts, but these are the questions. So what does accessing education mean to you? How do you access education? How do you support others in accessing education? What barriers have you or the people you are supporting confront when trying to access education? Are those barriers connected to other systems of oppression? And have you confronted, dismantled, how have you confronted, dismantled these barriers? The second question is, how can we think critically about how neoliberalism and settler colonialism shapes the university, and think about disruptive practices of access within these institutions? And then finally, disability justice activists speak about how we must address issues of access, but do so in a way that transforms the places and the systems that we're trying to access. How can we transform education through access and accessing education? So, Bernadette, you said at what time? Sorry, I forgot my clock somewhere. It's about 10:02. So let's have maybe 15 minutes of discussion, and we'll come back around 5 after 1. We have a room set up next door. And we have the ASL interpreters called up as a screen next door. So if you would like access to the ASL interpreters, or if you just want a quieter space, feel free to go next door, and there's food next door as well to have some discussions. But yeah, I think, and we'll come around at about when there's 5 minutes left to give you a bit of a time check. Okay, thanks everyone. So Natasha, in the back of the room has a mic that she can bring to you to the table. Then Jess is online, so Jess can facilitate some online discussion as well from the folks who are joining by Zoom. So we're really curious to, the sort of beautiful part of the Transformation Cafe is that we're hoping to have some discussion that is action-oriented, to think about decolonizing the university through access. And we're really excited to hear what folks are about to say in their small groups. I invite the panelists to respond as people report back, and we'll go from there. So if anyone would like to start either on Zoom or in person, please indicate to us, and we'll make sure that everyone can hear. Who would like to start us off? Yeah, over here. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we had.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Hi there. Hello. I think what we generally came to in our discussion within the institution, outside of the institution, student groups, student liaisons, faculty, staff, all of these groups who are looking for similar activities, but we don't even know that they're there. We don't even know how to connect. So the siloing, the deep siloing is really difficult. I mean, just at our small table, we have people working in relatively similar sort of areas who don't know each other. And it's lovely to get to meet them, but I don't know how to meet more of them, even when you cold call people, even when you're making connections constantly. Being able to connect with people and being able to sort of remove points of deep redundancy as we're all trying desperately to fight for somewhat similar goals, or at least some overlapping things, and really being able to consolidate and use that power of unification in that way, and being able, even on some very basic elements of student accessibility, staff accessibility, things like that, to really push for them. It's quite difficult to feel like you're floating alone, looking for solutions to large questions that we have here on our table, but having small teams and things like that. So ways to remove that silo or to just create some sort of connection would be really helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important for the Office of Social Innovation to hear that, because we're in a position in the university where we can facilitate more of these kinds of silo conversations. I think that their work, that's a responsibility, and we can do that. So please sign up for our newsletter, and we'll make sure to connect. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else online or in the room? Yeah, in the back.
At this point, don't you think that's by design? Like, we're siloed by design because I was just wondering, the siloing, which I would agree with completely, it's by design. If we were all working together, if we knew each other, if we'd be too threatening, we need to remain non-threatening. Thereby, there needs to just be one of us in every organization. We need to not really get to know each other, so we can get the checkbox on the strategic plan and then really not move in the directions we all want to move together. So I guess the question is, how do we make those connections in a world that intentionally tries to, I would argue, keep us on our own paths?
Very good. Do any panelists have any responses to any of this discussion?
I was gonna agree on the idea that silos and making us obsessed, and I think like there are folks in the room who've been talking a lot about like this individualistic promise, right? But then how can we counter that with like Tiana calls, what do you call it? Collective liberation. Yeah, so how can we work together? I do agree it's by design. I don't know, but anyway, yeah.
I agree. I agree, and I think what I'm hearing is a lot speaks to kind of sort of the ways in which like myself and my peers sort of organized like back when we were here, right? It's like, you know, these spaces almost served as like community centers, less than like sort of like, oh, the provincial community center, like you go do aquatics, right? But it's more like, this is a community center. It's a center of community. It's a space for community. It's a space for that return, that sort of bonding, but also like the building, right? And so I think that there are spaces, I mean, I don't know about anymore, but at least when I was here, which wasn't like not too long ago, but like there are spaces where I think that sort of like collective sort of dreaming and imagining and like that sort of relational experience can happen for sure. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers your question. I don't know what it's like to be a TMU student now, but I think it's possible. I definitely think it's possible. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit about that checkbox on the strategic plan, because I think a lot of it is about language. It's like, how do we phrase this just right to say that, you know, we're doing that, but concretely and practically, there's not much being done. Like, it's quite superficial, especially when you think about it in terms of EDI, because it's like a huge buzzword in education right now, right? equity, diversity, inclusion. Everybody wants to say, oh, you know what, in our strategic plan, we're addressing that. However, it does not really go beyond that, because having a few like workshops or conversations, or having a post or something saying we are committed to doing that. However, the folks that you're supposed to be helping, they're not really part of that conversation, and they're not really part of that development of those goals or helping to accomplish those goals. It does not really do what it's supposed to do beyond just that superficial check mark.
Thank you very much. I think we have someone on Zoom, so let's see what we can do. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm on Zoom with my hand up, but I can't really hear very well. Did you? Is it okay to speak?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Christine, and I'm so grateful to be here. I have silver hair and purple glasses, tinted glasses that help me with my scotopic sensitivity. And I'm coming to you from British Columbia on Vancouver Island in the Salish Sea. I have a small chihuahua, which I hope will continue to chill out while I speak. I am profoundly dyslexic. I read at a grade 3 to 5 level, always will, without assistive technology. My assistive technology costs about $3,000. I could not go to university until my 40s, when the Federal Accessibility Act made it available for me to go. The disparity between the Federal Accessibility Act and what the provinces assist with is horrible. I have a human rights complaint against BC Student Aid. I've been to the Ombudsman's office. So accessibility to me is, I'm in this system of colonial thinking of text-based dominance. I'm so behind. It's assumed that because I'm in an interdisciplinary PhD program, I am a Shirk doctoral fellow, that I have no other way of learning other than text-based. The science is there that is not about universal design. It's about multimodality of educational approaches. And how can one professor facilitate that? And how do we facilitate that when people that are neurodivergent and who are not hyperlexic, they are dyslexic? And that is not to dismiss my neurodivergent friends, because I need you and you know that I need you. I'm crushed by access, and I'm in this system that doesn't acknowledge my knowledge. And I look to my community, which is gay and lesbian when I joined. It's not that anymore. And the trans community, the Indigenous community are in intersectional communities to say, this is not enough. We have knowledge. The knowledge is within us. And I don't know any other profoundly dyslexic professors. I hear about them. There's a few that I researched, and I was asked in my thesis, why do you keep quoting this particular doctor? Well, because only one that they're writing about dyslexia, but they have dyslexia. So the activism that we're taking at Memorial University, I went back to Memorial University because I am a settler on that land, but my family goes back in Newfoundland. And I figured if I was going to embroil myself in disruption, I was going to do it with there. So we're looking towards having journal applications that are peer reviewed and video. There's no point for me to write an academic article on dyslexia. Who's got the $3,000 Kurzweil to go and read that? Any talk that's given must have ASL, and also engagement, so that if I speak too quickly or if I use something that's not within the time of deaf community linguistic framework, or I'm using a metaphor that may not work within that framework or in the autism framework, I have other parallel ways of unpacking that. And I'm so passionate about CRIP practice and so grateful for Dr. Eliza Chandler. And I'm so grateful for this space to be safe in my home, because with my scotopic sensitivity, the lighting would be hard. I'm also autistic and ADHD, but I argue that that is just dyslexia. So I'm grateful for these spaces, and what I'm most frustrated with and keep pressing at universities is the idea of inclusion is a colonial idea. I don't want to be included in the system. I am a sovereign learner. And those that make it as dyslexics are often privileged and white, like myself, who has a spouse that said, this funding doesn't cover your academic trajectory. I will hold the space for you to do that. And the policies are all in text-based. The complaint process is in text-based. I'm so tired of complaining. It takes so much. The trauma-informed spaces are very important. I went and got that diagnosis just so I could talk about it. But many of us do have a trauma and trauma disorders. So to continue to engage in these violent spaces that send you a link and say, you can go find this, or the scholarships that are all to apply for SHIRK was exhausting. It was 6 months of 16-hour, days to apply for that. And I believe that SHIRK will be fully accessible by the time that I'm in my 80s. So I always talk about a larger CRIP clubhouse, and that includes many communities. I don't want to be in a silo. I don't want to be alone. I need community. And I'm really grateful for this talk, because it is community building. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Those were really powerful words. And you really speak to us about the labor of academia and how it collides with the labor of trying to access academia. And I think that reveals a structural problem in that we're depending on disabled folks like yourself and myself to be industrious, to mobilize privilege in order to access education, instead of thinking about how we can transform education in ways that take that labor off of folks and are accessible for folks who, for any number of reasons, can't take on that labor and or may not have the support to take on that labor, financial burden and cost, these kinds of things. Anyone from the panel want to respond? Or in the room? We have a few minutes left. Yeah.
I'd just like to add on the inclusive design or that universal design. Because as an educator, I think that it's made me think about it differently, because sometimes we think about accommodating one person or accommodating a few people. But if we design things, we design the system. If when I design my semester for my course, I take into account all my students, then I don't have to stop to accommodate this one particular person, because I've already built in that accommodation for everybody that is in the room with me. So if when we're designing things in education or when we're thinking about access, we think of that universal design instead of building something or developing something and then later on trying to figure out, okay, how can we access this group, or how can we create access for this particular group or this equity seeking group. Then it's easier if we just universally try to think of everybody. and include those people in the conversations when we're deciding, when we're building, when we're developing things.
Thank you all very much for coming to our first Transparency Cafe. It was really lovely to be in community with all of you online, in person. Thank you so much to Bernetta, Leo, and MK for joining us today and starting us off with such thoughtful, intersectional, justice-based responses to the question, which remind us both of how we need access into the institution and we need to transform the institution, as you all were saying, as Christine was saying, and we need access to community spaces and to free education and to be in community, in educative community with each other in ways that really against the bones of the institution, as you describe, MK. So thank you very much, and it's not a plug for OSI, I really do mean, please do be in touch with us at the OSI. I can tell you that I want to start by saying a little bit about our our Social Innovation Activist Fund. This is a fund, a $5,000 fund available to any student who is working with a community group in ways that orient to how we think about social innovation through our office, which is thinking about social justice as a way of transforming the spaces we find ourselves in, as we've been talking about today. So if you're a student, if you're a faculty member or postdoc, please know that this fund is available, and it's not administered through WordSpring. It's a very low barrier award that we're really happy to give out, and there'll be different incarnations of that award as we move forward. So please keep in touch with us about that. Jess, is there anything I missed? Okay. And please also join us for our next Transformation Cafe on February 26th, 2025. We're in conversation about what that will be. We think in light of the passage of Bill 223, I have that right, I'm bad with numbers, yes, 223, the closure of the safe consumption and injection sites, which of course affect us here on campus. We're thinking about safety and sanctuary on campus space. So loosely, that'll be our discussion topic for the next one. We'll also be circulating a feedback survey to all registrants. We have paper copies of the survey on the tables. We really do appreciate if you can fill those out, because they'll help us ensure that the topics we cover in these conversations are reflective and responsive to our community, all of you, and it will help us demonstrate our impact so that we can do more of this kind of work on campus. And thank you finally, of course, again to our speakers, Bernetta, Leal, and MK, to our interpreters, David and Catherine, to the School of Disability Studies for your tech support, and to ADWA and all of our volunteers. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.